The courtroom was silent. Not the usual kind of silence where people whispered under their breath or shuffled in their seats. No, this was different. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, pressing down on everyone in the room. The kind of silence that made people hold their breath without even realizing it. Judge Wallace sat high on his bench, his gavel resting just inches from his hand. He was an older man, known for his stern demeanor and sharp tongue. Over the years, he had seen it all: defendants who cried, lawyers who argued until their voices cracked, and witnesses who stammered under pressure. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought. At the center of the courtroom, a young black girl stood. She couldn't have been older than 15 or 16, but there was something about her that made her presence impossible to ignore. She wasn't like the others who had come before Judge Wallace. She didn't look nervous. She didn't shift from foot to foot or lower her gaze in fear. No, she stood tall, her dark eyes locked onto the judge with an intensity that sent a ripple through the room. Her mother sat a few feet behind her, gripping the edge of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The lawyer beside the girl opened his mouth, ready to speak, but before he could get a single word out, she did something that no one expected. She interrupted the judge. Gasps filled the room. No one, absolutely no one, ever interrupted Judge Wallace. It simply wasn't done. It was the kind of thing that got people thrown out of court, the kind of thing that could turn a difficult situation into an impossible one. But this girl didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. And then she said one word. Just one. The moment it left her lips, everything changed. The judge's face drained of color, his usual confidence vanishing in an instant. The gavel in his hand slipped from his grip, clattering against the wooden surface in front of him. His fingers twitched. His mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. The courtroom was no longer just silent. It was frozen. Every person inside it seemed to be holding on to that one word, trying to process what it meant, why it had such an effect on the judge, and what would happen next. But no one, not even Judge Wallace himself, could have predicted what came after. For what felt like forever, the judge didn't move. His skin had gone pale, his fingers gripping the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles turned as white as the papers scattered before him. His eyes darted toward the girl, but there was something different in them now. Not anger, not frustration, fear. A murmur ran through the courtroom, but no one dared to speak loudly. Even the attorneys, normally so quick to react, looked uncertain, their eyes flicking between the judge and the girl, as if trying to piece together what had just happened. The girl's mother, still seated in the crowd, whispered her daughter's name in a tone thick with both warning and worry. But the girl didn't react. She didn't look away from the judge. She didn't even blink. Judge Wallace swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, no longer full of the authority he was known for. It cracked slightly at the edges, like a man who had just seen something he couldn't explain. "Say that again." His words weren't a command. They were a plea. The girl exhaled slowly, and then in that same clear, unwavering voice, she repeated the word. This time, the reaction was even stronger. The judge jerked back in his chair as if he had been physically struck. A bead of sweat formed on his temple, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for a glass of water that he didn't drink. Someone in the courtroom gasped. A reporter, seated in the back, scribbled furiously in his notebook, as if realizing that something much bigger was happening than the case they had come to cover. No one else in the room understood the significance of the word. To them, it was just a sound, a name, or maybe a reference to something unknown. But to Judge Wallace, it meant everything, because he knew what it was. because he knew that no one else was supposed to know it. And yet, here she was, a girl he had never seen before. A girl with no connection to his past, no reason to know what she knew. And she had said it. The weight of it pressed down on his chest, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something completely foreign to him inside a courtroom. Panic. His mind raced, trying to figure out how this was possible. Had someone told her? Had she found something she wasn't supposed to find? Or worse, had she been sent here, standing before him now, as some kind of warning? Judge Wallace opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned to his clerk, as if searching for an answer in the young man's face. But the clerk only looked confused, completely unaware of the storm raging inside the judge's mind. The girl tilted her head slightly, watching him, almost studying him. And then, in a voice that cut through the tension in the room like a knife, she asked, "You remember, don't you?" Judge Wallace's breath hitched. It wasn't just the word. It was the way she said it. The certainty. The quiet accusation buried inside it. And that's when he knew she wasn't just guessing. She knew exactly what she was doing. The courtroom, once filled with quiet murmurs, now held nothing but stunned silence. Even those who had no idea what was happening could feel the shift in the air. Something much bigger than this case was unfolding. The judge forced himself to breathe. He couldn't let this get out of control. Not here. Not now. He needed to regain control of the room, of the moment, of himself. His voice, steadier now but still thin with unease, rang out. "This court is adjourned." The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. But even as people began to shuffle out, whispering and speculating, the girl didn't move. She just stood there, watching him. And for the first time in his life, Judge Wallace realized he was the one on trial now. As the judge's gavel struck the wood, signaling the end of the court session, the tension in the room didn't break. If anything, it thickened. People whispered as they gathered their belongings, exchanging glances filled with curiosity and confusion. The judge rose quickly, his hands still slightly unsteady, and turned to exit. But just as he reached the door leading to his chambers, he stopped. The girl hadn't moved. She was still standing in the same spot, her dark eyes locked onto him, unwavering. The weight of her presence made his breath feel shallow. His grip tightened on the door handle, but something in him wouldn't allow him to walk away. Instead, he turned back to face her. "Who told you?" His voice was quieter now, meant only for her ears. The girl's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. There was no triumph in her expression, only certainty. "You already know." His pulse quickened. He had spent years building walls around the past, covering every crack, making sure nothing ever seeped through. And yet, here she was, standing in front of him like a ghost, speaking a truth he had buried. "Leave it alone," he said, his voice sharper than before. The girl's gaze didn't waver. Some things don't stay buried. The words hung between them, thick with meaning. Judge Wallace clenched his jaw. He had control over this courtroom, over the law, over people's futures. But at this moment, standing in front of this girl, he felt powerless. She took a slow step toward him, and suddenly, in the corner of his vision, he noticed a figure moving in the back of the courtroom. A young black boy, no older than 13 or 14, stood near the exit. He was dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, his posture relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. He wasn't watching the judge. He was watching the girl. Judge Wallace's stomach tightened. He had never seen either of them before, and yet, somehow, they knew. The boy glanced at the girl, gave her a small nod, and then, as if satisfied, he turned to leave. The girl lingered for a second longer before stepping back as well. Judge Wallace could only watch as they walked away. His throat felt dry, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't expected. He had spent his life making decisions, passing judgments, ensuring order. But as those two disappeared through the courtroom doors, he realized something chilling. For the first time ever, the verdict wasn't his to give. And deep down, he knew, whatever was coming next, he wouldn't be able to stop it. The past had finally caught up to him.